So close to having that timed properly. Good morning, and thank you for joining us to learn more about employee ownership as a strategy for economic development and resilience, whether in the midst of a massive population shift like aging baby boomers, a global pandemic, or even if you can imagine it in these times in the absence of circumstances that threaten our lives and livelihoods. My name is Maury Ingram, and I'm the CEO of the Whatcom Community Foundation and also a former small business owner. Whether you work in the field of economic or community development, or you're a business owner yourself, you know that businesses and communities are most successful when everyone is pulling in the same direction and invested in the same goal. Employee ownership is designed to foster just that kind of culture and brings many other benefits you'll hear about today. You'll also learn a bit about the efforts underway, with many thanks to our local partners in the economic development field here in Bellingham and Whatcom County, to develop a more robust ecosystem to support the creation and conversion of employee-owned enterprises across Washington state. Today's webinar is being recorded, and all the registrants will receive a link to the recording as soon as it's available on the Project Equity website. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, so please enter your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat along the way. That will allow us to keep all that information for future reference in case we can't get to everyone's questions today. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Sarah Lee, the Governor's Sector Lead and Director of Advanced Manufacturing for the Washington State Department of Commerce. Sarah will share her perspectives on the value of employee ownership and the critical partnership potential in economic development and community philanthropy working together for stronger local economies that work for everyone.
Thank you, Maury. As Maury said, I'm the Governor's Advanced Manufacturing Sector Lead, which probably means nothing except for what I really believe I am is just a dot connector, bringing people and resources together to make BHAG's big, hairy, audacious goals happen. Maury and the Whatcom Community Foundation are a shining example nationally of that and the power and potential of community foundations. Whatcom Community Foundation and many community foundations on this call have used their power of convening in close connection to their communities as a platform to bring people together to explore new ways of doing things. And this power and willingness to use it is more important today than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic has been and continues to be a huge tragedy. People have died, businesses have struggled and gone over, and many have lost jobs. But it's also an opportunity to rebuild in a more equitable and resilient way for the future if we all work together. Whatcom Community Foundation and community foundations through our state are important partners for those of us in economic development. And one of the things that the Whatcom Community Foundation is doing is helping us explore how employee ownership can play a key role. And the cool thing about it is, as a small business owner, former small business owner myself, is that there's other folks who have gone ahead of us. And that's like Superfeet in Ferndale. I don't know if you've been there, bought their products, they're awesome. A1 Builders in Bellingham, and Excel Pacific, which is in Bellingham and all along the West Coast and Colorado. Now, employee ownership isn't meant for everyone or every business, but thanks to Whatcom Community Foundation, we have a chance as economic development folks, and the foundation folks and all the other folks in the community. We have a chance to explore it, kick the tires, and ultimately be able to offer it as one option to help our businesses recover stronger than before. Thank you.
I'll jump in. Thank you so much, Maury, for introducing us, and Sarah for kicking us off. I'm Alison Lingane. I'm the co-founder of Project Equity. We are a national nonprofit dedicated to employee ownership, and we really work to make what we consider this best-kept secret business model more widely known and understood, so communities, businesses, and workers can reap the benefits. I'm joined today, in addition to Sarah and Maury, by my colleague Evan Edwards from Project Equity, and Diane Gasaway and John McNamara from the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, and each of them will introduce themselves when they join the kick off their section. When we talk about employee ownership, we mean broad-based employee ownership. And so this is compared with, say, stock options or management buyouts, in which a small number of employees, usually management, has access to ownership. What we're referring to in this conversation today is when all employees who meet basic criteria, say a minimum number of hours per week threshold, have opportunity to become employee owners. And employee ownership provides value really to three constituencies: to the community broadly, by retaining jobs and businesses, by keeping companies rooted in place and in the next generation; to the businesses, by creating more resilient companies that outperform their peers; and to the employees themselves, by creating high-quality jobs that includes building up ownership of an asset, the asset being the business where they work. This is Ren. He is from a slice of New York, which is a pizzeria, has 2 locations with about 35 employees. Ren is one of the founder worker owners from their transition to become an employee-owned business in 2017. At that time, it was a 10-year-old company, and the sale provided its founders with a market rate financial exit for the husband-wife founders. The impact for the workers of employee ownership has been profound. Over the last 2 years, a slice of New York has distributed more than $600,000 of profits, and this is on top of raising wages. The company itself has also experienced tax savings, making it easier to share the financial benefits with the full employee base. As we begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel through this dark COVID winter of the tremendous economic disruption, we really need cost-effective strategies that build truly resilient economies. And employee ownership is one proven solution that applies across most industries. Here's the agenda for the presentation today, and I'm going to kick off by talking about what we call the twin small business crises. Pre-pandemic, we already had a small business crisis given the silver tsunami of baby boomers. And COVID has just taken this to a whole new level. As we know, if more small businesses go out of business or change hands, it can really affect local economic vitality. Rural communities are, of course, especially hard hit when longstanding businesses are lost. So we need decisive action to preserve Washington's small businesses and jobs. What do the numbers look like in terms of COVID? The census does a weekly survey of small businesses, the Small Business Pulse. What you see on this slide is the responses of Washington businesses to the question, overall, how has this business been affected by COVID-19? The takeaway is that it's affecting practically every business. 80% are either seeing a large or moderate negative effect. On the right, you'll see how different industries are affected. Not surprisingly, some are hit harder than others, hotels and restaurants, for example, but no industry has been spared. And so this is all happening on top of the silver tsunami. It's estimated that 1 out of every 2 local job creators, these are the privately held small businesses with employees, are owned by baby boomers. And boomers today are aged 55 to 74. So the impact of their retirement is already being felt, but it is long from over because most baby boomers don't retire right at 65 from their businesses. In the state of Washington, the estimate is that nearly 60,000 local employers are owned by baby boomers, employing nearly 600,000 people. So these are pre-COVID numbers, of course. So with nearly 60,000 businesses owned by people at or way beyond their retirement age, how many of those business owners want to forward invest to ensure their company weathers the crisis? Project Equity, we have partnered, as Maury mentioned, with her team at the Whatcom Community Foundation to lay the groundwork and engage stakeholders to move towards a Washington State Employee Ownership Center based in Bellingham and serving businesses all across the state. Through this partnership, we completed a study at the City of Bellingham to help local leaders understand the need and opportunity for employee ownership. Now, Project Equity has done studies like this in multiple different cities, small and large, and we have generally found a pattern that holds true across all of them. Long-standing businesses have an outsized impact on the local economy. Probably not a surprise. You can see that in the stats here for the City of Bellingham, that businesses over 20 years old count for 63% of small business revenue, and they employ 2 in 5 workers. The importance of these long-standing businesses to our local economic vitality cannot be understated. And each community is slightly different workers, different mixes of industries, but the strategy of local business preservation through employee ownership can meet those different needs. With so many businesses needing to change hands, we have lots of sellers and few buyers. So businesses listed for sale sell at a very low rate. Kids are not taking over their parents' businesses these days. Only about 15% transition to the second generation. And so employee ownership helps business owners find a buyer right under their nose. When business owners think about their succession options, which, by the way, this is the first and most important piece of the puzzle, that we just have to get business owners thinking about and acting on their succession planning. We have, unfortunately, many examples of business owners who wait too long and then it's too late. Medical crises force them to liquidate. Or year after year, they just start slowing down and then the business value is reduced significantly. And so what we really just want to avoid altogether is the company closing down and the community losing those jobs and business assets. But even if there weren't trouble finding a buyer, when we ask business owners to take a step back and say, what is it that you want when you retire and sell your business? Employee ownership really measures up to other options. It's about legacy. It's about a market value sale. Employee ownership can bring really meaningful tax benefits to the seller and the business. And of course, it retains employees. We're working right now with an 80-year-old business owner who, when the pandemic hit, he could have just closed up shop. He actually didn't need the sale of the business for his retirement, but he has 40 employees, more than half of whom have been with him for over 15 years. And he shared with us that he just couldn't shut his business down and take that away from them. And could we please help him? So we know small businesses are hurting right now and that we have a huge business succession need. Employee ownership can address both of these needs by increasing employee engagement, creating stronger businesses, quality jobs, and offering a smart business succession strategy. Another quick story. This one is from one of our clients, Cal Solar. They're a 100% employee-owned solar design and installation company. They have a team around 30. And early in the shelter in place, they made the decision to furlough all of their employees so they could cap unemployment. While furloughed, they still came together to try and figure out how to keep the business earning revenue, how to keep their jobs. They came up with a new idea, which was to become a battery reseller for storing electricity produced by solar panels. And they were able to create a whole new line of business that ended up making up for all of the lost revenue that came about from the business disruption of shelter in place. And they're on track to meet their original revenue goal for 2020 as a result. So would furloughed employees in a non-employee-owned business have shown this proactive ingenuity? It's all because of the employee engagement that ownership brings. Given the benefits to workers and the engagement, it's not surprising that employee-owned businesses outperform their peers. Pulled out 2 data points. We see higher profit margins, 8.5% more than industry peers, and we see sales and employment growing 2% faster year after year after year. Stronger businesses that outperform their peers have more money to share with their employees. Based on a study by the National Center for Employee Ownership, we see that employee owners earn wages that are 1/3 again as high as their industry peers and non-employee owned firms. They stick around at their jobs about 1/2 again as long, which, by the way, is also a lower cost for the business for not having to replace employees as frequently, and their household net worth is nearly twice as high. And we have a recent study published by the Employee Ownership Foundation that shows, talks about how employee-owned firms fared better and created job stability for their employees. The report talks about how the employee-owned companies experienced similar shock from the pandemic as other companies, but it was their response to the shock that was different. Non-employee-owned companies were nearly 6 times as likely to report that the business would never return to its usual level of performance. This is the kind of resiliency that we want lots more of in our local economies. So we're going to switch gears now, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Evan Edwards, to talk a bit about what employee ownership is and how it works.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for the introduction, Alison. My name is Evan Edwards. I am Director of Strategic Partnerships and Business Engagement for Project Equity. And 2 really important parts of my role include working with the leadership of localities, cities and counties throughout the U.S. to help them to understand the value of employee ownership as a business retention strategy that stabilizes economies and employment, as well as providing a pathway to business ownership for workforces. The other piece of my job that's really important is I have a team of 6 folks who do consultations with business owners. Every week we do dozens of consultations with the objective of helping them to understand how employee ownership transitions are a good way for them to have business succession and to see a return on their many years of hard work as a business owner. So I'd like to talk to everyone about a little bit about how employee ownership transitions happen. And so let's move into that right now. What is an employee ownership transition? A simple description, a simple description of employee ownership transition is when ownership of a business is conveyed from its legacy owner to its workforce. These transactions are financed via debt that is serviced by the new employee-owned entity and not the individual employees themselves. And though employee-owned, management and operations remain consistent even as governance of the business changes. So what are the forms of broad-based employee ownership? The 3 more common forms are employee stock ownership plans, also known as ESOPs, worker cooperatives, and employee ownership trusts. ESOPs are the most commonly known form in the U.S. They're the best fit for companies with larger workforces, say 30 plus, 35 plus employees, and also with substantial EBITDA. ESOPs provide potentially significant tax benefits to both the legacy business owner and or shareholders of the business and the business itself. As a retirement plan, ESOPs are governed by ERISA law, and not to get into the weeds here, but there are certain regulatory costs that are a part of operating an ESOP, and that's the reason why they aren't necessarily a fit for smaller workforces and businesses that don't have significant EBITDA. Worker cooperatives are a fit for just about any size business. At Project Equity, we tend to focus on those that have workforces of 10, 15 or more employees. Co-ops are far less complex in their structure than ESOPs, and they also provide a more direct role in governance than an ESOP might. And finally, employee ownership trusts are a less common form and offer the benefits of customization for the selling owners for whom ESOPs or worker cooperative transitions aren't a fit. So business readiness factors, it's really important, particularly in our work at Project Equity, because our work extends beyond simply wanting to transition business to employee ownership to also wanting to normalize employee ownership. In other words, have this become a business model that is readily executed by business professionals nationally. And it does a disservice if we are transitioning companies that aren't ready for that sort of transition. So what do we look for? Business got to be profitable, good financial health for the past 5 years, and experienced employees are really important because we want businesses to continue to succeed as they have in the years prior, and having a workforce that has a management depth and an understanding of how it is that the business operates is really important. And then, of course, a proven track record of success. So once a business owner arrives at the conclusion that employee ownership transition is the right succession plan, how do they go about actually transitioning the business from their ownership to ownership by the workforce? Well, as with any other business transaction, a sale price and deal terms need to be established. Part of our work at Project Equity is helping business owners to understand how at what transaction price a business can be sold. We do that as part of our feasibility assessment process. Once that proposition has been established, the business obtains a loan. Now notice I said the business obtains a loan and not the workforce itself. And that's because the business then services the debt that pays the business owner through its going forward cash flow. So financing the sale. Typically, in a typical transaction, there's 30 to 50% seller financing. So the business owner holds a note. We work with CDFIs. You all are probably familiar with them, Community Development Financial Institutions. They happen to have alignment with us, many of them mission alignment insofar as the importance of seeing employee ownership as a means for providing economic resiliency for workers. And so they are more inclined to support these transactions as lenders, generally the senior debt holder. And then there is a nominal buy-in that employees of a business may provide. This is as much an element of creating ownership culture. In other words, we want the workforce to have skin in the game. Now, keep in mind, please, that we understand that workers generally don't have cash sitting around that can be applied for this. And so typically in our feasibility or transition stage, Project Equity will structure a payroll deduction plan that will allow employees to be able to contribute to this employee buy-in at a rate that works for them through payroll deductions over time. Accelerate Employee Ownership is an initiative that Project Equity is currently partnered with Shared Capital Cooperative to provide funding for these transactions. And by Q2 of next year, we expect to be able to offer financing that is inclusive of employee ownership setup costs and, as needed, working capital for business continuity. The goal is to make sure that cash flow isn't a barrier to employee ownership. Unique benefits of employee buyouts. So this is really important because business owners obviously have other options. They are limited. I think, as Alison pointed out, the ability to transition a business within a family is less seen these days. Selling a business on a platform or through a business broker is often a transaction with what we would refer to as friction. So the owner can't control the pace. The owner oftentimes sees erosion insofar as the sale price that they're looking for. And oftentimes with a strategic buyer or other acquirer of a business, the workforce is sacrificed. And so through employee ownership, the owners can achieve a fair sale price. It's based on an assessment of the capacity of the business to be able to pay for itself through going forward profits. The owner can control the pace of the transaction. So many times we meet an owner who would like to stay involved with the business over a period of time, isn't ready to leave at the point that a sale agreement is finalized. Employee ownership transactions provide the ability for owners to stay a part of the process and stay a part of the business. And then, of course, really important from a mission perspective, Project Equity, is that we're able to preserve the workforce in place, preserve jobs and economies, and basically allow for a continuity of legacy that is not achieved with sale to an outside buyer. And so what does the employee ownership process look like? Well, it's really important for a business owner or anyone who's interested in employee ownership to explore the process. Once there is an understanding a little bit more of how employee ownership works and what the benefit might be, to then move to a feasibility assessment. And during that assessment, the owner wants to take a look at, is this really a solution that fits their particular circumstance, both from a personal perspective and also the perspective of the business and the workforce. And if those two boxes are checked, then a business can move into a transition phase. And that's when it's actually established how the employee-owned business will function going forward. And then, of course, there's closing the sale. And then finally, and of particular importance to project equity, is the Thrive step, or step 4, which is essentially establishing that the business and the workforce are stable and successful on a going forward basis after the business owner has exited. And so with that, I hope you all have a greater understanding of how these transactions happen. I'm sure that you'll have questions. We can't speed through an explanation of this in just a few minutes and have it land with everyone. So we do look forward to your questions in this regard. And with that, I will pass the baton to Diane Gasaway.
Thanks, Evan. Good morning, everyone. Cooperatives are one of my favorite topics, and I'm glad to be participating in this presentation. My name is Diane Gasaway. I'm the Executive Director for the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. To my continuing amazement, I have had the opportunity to work in this field for almost 20 years now. In my opinion, it's a wonderful pursuit, and it feels right to help people take control over their economic futures through business ownership. The Northwest Cooperative Development Center is a nonprofit organization focused almost exclusively on the cooperative business model. This slide lists a number of the services we provide, which, other than the first two and the last item, marketing the cooperative advantage, look a lot like other types of business development. There's no getting away from the fact that there has to be a reasonable expectation of positive cash flow. However, the board and governance roles are critical in the conversion and startup phase as well as after launch, and this is where NWCDC comes in. To help workers navigate the development and conversion processes, NWCDC currently has a team of 8 cooperative development specialists, including John McNamara and myself. Our service territory includes Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. At any one time these days, we have approximately 80 projects going on, all in various stages of development, and about half of these projects are conversions. The Northwest Cooperative Development Center is funded through grants, contracts, and donations. Many of the grants that we receive have been from USDA. They've been a great partner throughout the years, and the funding provides for much of the pre-development activities for co-ops located in rural areas. Recently, we've had good conversations with other funders and are hopeful to have new resources for the work we undertake in urban locations. One last note about funding in general. NWCDC has a small loan fund that worker co-ops have been able to access for working capital loans that wouldn't otherwise be available. I'm excited to share that this fall we were awarded a grant from the U.S. Treasury Department to create a community development financial institution, also known as a CDFI, to expand our loan program. This morning, we'd like to share a bit more detail about the assistance NWCDC provides small businesses that choose to convert, and some examples of recent conversions that, despite the challenges created by the pandemic, are making real differences in the lives of their new owners. Dr. John McNamara, NWCDC's Senior Cooperative Development Specialist, is also with us this morning, and I pass the rest of the presentation on to him.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Diane. And yes, John McNamara, Senior Cooperative Development Specialist. I've been with NWCDC since 2014, and before that spent 26 years with a worker-owned taxi cab company, which at the time when I left was the second largest cab company in Wisconsin. So one of the things we do is, or one of our partners in our work nationally is the Worker to Owners Collaborative, which is a project of the Democracy at Work Institute. And we tend to follow the outline that we're talking about here, which is consists of essentially 5 steps: explore, assess, structure, complete, and then support. I'll talk a little bit about each of these, but the key part of the exploration is, as mentioned earlier, is making sure that it's the business is a going concern, that it's profitable, and that it functions, but also going a little bit deeper into the weeds and understanding what it will cost to replace the owner. Sometimes in small businesses, owners aren't always compensating themselves for all of their work as the owner. And of course, once it becomes a cooperative, that work will have to be paid, and overtime and other issues have to be adjusted in. So we need to build that back into the system to make sure that the business will still be feasible, or what it will take for it to be feasible. And then the other end of it is to make sure that the staff actually want to become worker owners. And sometimes it's getting people over that barrier of thinking, they might see that the owner is fully dedicated to the business, and they don't necessarily want that level of commitment, but we are able to work with them. And the mantra, many hands make light work, is often a big part of that step of helping workers understand that becoming an owner in the sense of a co-op doesn't mean that they have to do everything, or that they are forever, committed to this business, but that they they can participate and have a different relationship. The next step, of course, is getting into looking what the future will look like with ownership. Again, that's building out a basic cost analysis and developing a plan, bringing the entire staff into the discussion, and actually starting to practice democracy or democratic ownership at an early level, having the staff actually elect a buyout committee that then does most of the work in putting together the next phases, which includes working with outside professionals, not only us, but lawyers and accountants, to help determine the best type of sale, whether it's going to be what is called an asset purchase, where they create the co-op and the co-op buys the business, or whether it'll be a merger where the workers join the existing business and then change the bylaws to make it a cooperative model. And that then involves also talking about the structure and arranging financing with groups like Shared Capital, and like I said, like Diane mentioned, our own revolving loan fund. And also talking about what sort of financial commitment the future members of the co-op will be making. All of this, of course, ends up coming up on the close of the sale and celebrating that. But then we also continue the support afterwards, making sure that that the new board of directors and that the membership get the proper training, and making that transition from being an employee to an owner of the organization, of understanding shared governance and learning how to run meetings and create policies, and figuring out what changes they want to make in their culture. And usually that support will last up to at least the first general membership meeting, where that buyout committee or the incorporating board becomes an elected board of directors, and even beyond. So this is basically the formula that gets followed. There's a lot of nuances and juggling that happens in all this. It's not essentially linear. A lot of things will be happening at the same time, but it is a basic process. And so to round things out with a few minutes left, I want to talk about some of our successes. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is a really, I think, a nice list of some of the various types of businesses we have. I want to point out Working Systems. They're an example of, they're a software development company. And so they ended up being, I would say, a pretty light touch in terms of things. The company had already been using team management, and as software developers, they were used to writing or working in a world where everything is sort of an if-then situation. So if you do this, then this will happen. So that allowed them to pretty easily jump into to managing the company. And in fact, their productivity soared after the transition. And they're really a great success story of how fast that productivity can ramp up. Likewise, well, just the general things. So marine survey and assessments in Port Townsend, they do, as the name might suggest, they do environmental surveys for building and new new construction. And then we have a number of cafes. Orca Books is also a good example. They were a little bit more, required a little bit more assistance. They were in a very difficult retail spot, and actually they converted on April 1st of this year. So right as the shutdown was happening, was when they made their change. And for them, part of that feasibility was really looking at their whole location. For them to become and be profitable, they really ended up having to move. So not only did they close on the conversion during the stay-at-home orders, they also moved 3 blocks to a new location as well. So it was really a lot of work for them, but they're pretty successful. They're open now, and they have a lot of support in the community. And I think they're also a great spot in that they're kind of considered one of those downtown businesses in Olympia that make Olympia. And so that's another part of some of these small businesses, is that very often they are part of the identity of the culture of the community that they exist in. And so keeping them isn't only about keeping jobs, which is important. It's also about helping that community maintain its identity as what it wants to be and how it projects itself out to the greater community. And I think I'm going to pass it back to, I think, Alison, right? And then I should say yes. I'm sorry, if you want to contact us, our contact information is there. We are always happy to talk with anybody about their options and take them through in a half hour to an hour with no worry about cost to explore what they want to do. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to both Diane and John from the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. And, as you can see, employee ownership really can be a fit for companies of all sizes. So from on the smaller end, about 10 employees or up, those tend to be a better fit for the worker cooperative form. And as the company size grows to many hundred and larger, we can look to all of the forms of employee ownership, inclusive of employee stock ownership plans, employee ownership trusts, and worker cooperatives. So I want to really encourage the folks who are joining the webinar today to pose your questions. We want to get a nice, robust list of questions going for our Q&A. So in the webinar panel, there is a questions section, and please go ahead and type your questions in there so that we can address them when we get to the Q&A in a few minutes. So in terms of resources for Washington businesses, there are a number of really experienced, so in addition to the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, a number of really experienced qualified employee stock ownership plan or ESOP practitioners. So the question of who to go to, there's not a sort of a lack of resources to support the businesses. I do want to make a special note with the slide that we've got up here about small business development centers. Communities have a lot of resources that support small businesses. SBDCs are important because every single community has one. And so SBDCs, with the support of organizations that are already fluent, if you will, in employee ownership, can themselves gain enough fluency to play a really important role. The numbers, when I talked about 60,000 companies owned by retiring baby boomers, the need for this is vast. And so these SBDCs that are embedded in every community can play a role in spotting businesses. We call it candidate spotting businesses that could be a fit for employee ownership. They can also potentially provide that first level of education, talking about employee ownership, getting the business owners interested enough to then be able to have a conversation, set up a consult with an organization like the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, if a co-op might be a fit, with an organization like Project Equity to explore a full range of options. And then they can also partner with employee ownership experts to either learn how to directly provide or to engage that expert to help the business in areas like debt capacity analysis or preparing for the management transition. And one of the things that we do at Project Equity is we do partner directly with a number of SBDCs. We have relationships with SBDCs in both rural and urban communities. And we serve as a contractor to do this education of the SBDC, as well as to provide direct services to the business in the feasibility stage. One really great example is the Western Washington SBDC in Bellingham that has partnered with the Whatcom Community Foundation to raise the profile of employee ownership as a viable option for succession planning. So CJ, their center director, might be on the webinar today, and she brought her entire team of business advisors to a half-day training that was hosted by the Whatcom Community Foundation and put on jointly by Project Equity and the Beister Institute. Beister is a wonderful employee ownership organization that is out of the Rady School of Business at UC San Diego. So this is just one example of how SBDCs can kind of get up that learning curve of employee ownership and be ready to engage with small businesses in their community. We also want to highlight community philanthropy as a really important partner in spreading the need and opportunity of employee ownership. Two conversations really all across the state of Washington. Community foundations, affinity funds, like Potlatch and the Latino Community Fund, and United Ways are all involved in bringing this conversation together today. Okay, so you know, if you are somebody who is a small business advocate or economic development professional or at an SBDC or another small business organization, what does it look like to start the conversation with business owners? So we could go to the next slide. You know, these things on the left here on the slide are what we often hear are some of the motivations for business owners. So in this first one, I want to preserve what I've built and I want to see it thrive both during and after this crisis. So really integrating, and this is, you know, talking about the business owner, well, integrating employee ownership and investing in an ownership culture makes the business more resilient, or, you know, helps the business get through the crisis and then, you know, really go back to it's how things were. Remember the story about the solar company and how the owners really came together during the crisis. Business owners say, I want to take care of my employees when I leave. Well, in employee ownership, employees share in the success of the business through profit sharing and asset appreciation. So it really does that. Or, gosh, you know, I've struggled to find a buyer. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find a buyer. Well, as I said, employee ownership helps you find a buyer right under your nose. Employees have qualifying experience, and they don't need to bring the financing out of their own mattress or their rich uncle, right? This is a leverage buyout where the company is the one taking out the loan based on the company's cash flow history. And then another one that we hear commonly is, you know, I'd like to remain involved. Like, I'm not ready to just cut the, you know, immediately cut my involvement, but you know, I'm interested in somebody else taking the reins. And one of the benefits of an employee ownership succession plan is that owner can remain involved and reduce that involvement over time, but ultimately begin to share that weight of both the workload and of ownership. So this is a quote I just wanted to share from the president and CEO of the Bellingham Regional Chamber of Commerce, who really notes the need as we are looking towards a post-pandemic economy for approaches that provide business sustainability, employee retention, and community success, and flagging employee ownership as a strategy that does just that. And really want to serve as a resource to help expand employee ownership, to help people learn about it and assess if it can be a fit for the needs in the community or the needs of specific businesses. We really encourage you to reach out to us. Let us know how we can help. We will be planning a future webinar that will be targeted for small business owners, and we will let you know about that so that you can spread that invitation to the business owners in your network. And that will go more deeply into the nuts and bolts of employee ownership and how it works and how to get started. We'll be sending out the slides and the recording for today's webinar, along with some links to some key materials that might be helpful to get some conversation started. So thank you all so very much. And with that, we would like to move into our Q&A. If we can ask all our presenters to come back on camera here, and I will turn it over to Maury.
Great. And actually, in the interest of the size of our faces, I'm actually going to go off camera and let you all be seen. So while we're waiting for questions, and again, we really look forward to hearing from you, what you would like to hear a little bit more from our panelists about. I wonder if you all could speak a bit to how folks, I believe we have a few local governments on the webinar, and I wonder if you could speak to how local governments can play a role in helping to build out this strategy for local communities.
Evan, do you want to take that first?
Sure, I'd love to. So first of all, I appreciate the question. Thank you, Mari. Local governments are really key to this work because y'all have your hands on the pulse of local business community. And so what Project Equity likes to do is tap into your local relationships. Oftentimes that's through an economic development department. Depends on who is actually conducting relationships and providing services for businesses in a particular locality. But we like to do a couple things in particular in engaging with local government. One is helping local government to understand what companies might be at risk for retention. In other words, who are the business owners that might be looking to retire? What are the legacy businesses that are really important to a particular community, and whether in terms of workforce and sizable workforce or revenue, helping to determine who those are. Oftentimes you may know them right away and just want to point them our direction, which we always appreciate. But digging deep and helping local governments to understand, who those businesses are, and then crafting engagement strategies for being able to engage with those business owners and start to bring employee ownership as a succession strategy to them. So that oftentimes looks like us doing, well, in the COVID era, webinars like this, where we've invited business owners and what we refer to as business connectors or business influencers. Those are folks that, like a business owner's CPA or their attorney or someone else who has their ear and might be able to say to them, hey, employee ownership's this great strategy you might want to look at. So localities can help us with that. The other really important piece is for us to, I'll use the term, hardwire employee ownership into local government so that on an ongoing basis, you are able to identify companies that would be good candidates for employee ownership transition. This might not necessarily mean a business that's right now 30 years operating and the owner may be on the way out the door, but a business that's operated for 15 years, and we know it's really important that that business owner have the options for employee ownership on their radar earlier rather than later. So local government can help us with all three of those things: identifying businesses, engaging with business owners, and then developing strategies that allow employee ownership to be hardwired or baked into economic development policy on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Evan. That's terrific. I also wonder whether how you're adapting, knowing that one of the readiness factors is making sure that businesses are profitable. Post-COVID, how are you working with businesses that are either thinking about employee ownership or partway through the process when that profitability may be a little more perilous at this time?
Diane, might you want to kick that off and then we can pass it to Evan?
Sure. So we have a few conversions going on right now, and all of the steps that were mentioned earlier, the processes for conversion, and looking at the feasibility, are still relevant. And conversations there about what modifications need to be considered as they look to keeping doors open. And John mentioned how with working systems, they really excelled once they took over conversion and had ownership of where the business is going. And that's not an unusual occurrence. We've seen that happen with other conversions, and getting us new ideas going and being able to implement them has been super useful. And Alison also referred to the solar business that did the same thing, where they pivoted and found new ways to keep their doors open. So feasibility is still a really important part of that, and as are all of the other steps.
So what we've seen at Project Equity is a significant amount of uncertainty amongst business owners. given the crisis. And obviously, as Alison alluded to earlier, a fair amount of business disruption. We've tried to take that into consideration in our feasibility assessment process. And so, 2020 is largely a snapshot, right? Historical financial performance remains really important to us. And then within our feasibility assessment process, we're taking a lot closer look at the business's current resiliency and its ability to rebound and sustain on the other side of COVID. And so there's a little bit more art that's now a part of the science with respect to our work. But we recognize that, this is hopefully just a snapshot in time, and businesses that have prior strong fundamentals, if we can find ways that support those fundamentals existing on the other side, we think those businesses will remain strong candidates. Now, to that end, I mentioned towards the end of my section of the presentation that we're coming close to closing a fund. That a key aspect of that will be business continuity capital that could reasonably help business owners that are right now dealing with uncertainty, not inclined to spend on either capital equipment or other means to support their businesses right now, just to provide them additional runway to get to the other side of this circumstance. And part of the incentive is that an employee ownership transition on the other side can also provide them a succession means by accessing some business continuity capital, we would call it. So we remain cognizant of this circumstance not necessarily being indicative of a business's history or its future, and we try to be very mindful of that when we're doing an assessment of a particular business right now.
Alison, can I add one thing? It's about so we are running into a little bit of a hiccup with the PPP loans that many of the businesses have received, and in that conversion, it appears that forgiveness needs to happen first for the best outcome and the least complexity, I guess, for the owners to take over, the new owners.
You're muted, Alison.
Yeah, Diane, I'm just saying your sound quality is coming in a little hard to understand. I don't know if there's an alternative method.
Great. Well, I think we may have time for any final comments from any of our panelists. Any final thoughts you want to share before we do a little quick wrap?
I think I just want to mention that about a year or so ago, we worked with a couple of attorneys out of Colorado to do a series that we call the Legacy Project, and we videotaped their 3-hour presentation, and it's on our website and easy to digest 20-minute segments that talks about the tax and different structures of employee ownership. And if people go to our website at wcdc.coop and look for our Legacy Project, I put the link in, hopefully the link can be sent out, but it's a nice primer for people to go deeper into the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I would just like to put a little bit finer point on the comment Alison made earlier about the silver tsunami. We're at a very unique time in U.S. economic history from the perspective that we have this very large cohort of baby boomer business owners who will be exiting in the next 5 to 15 years. And this is a unique time in that through employee ownership, we are able to transition some of the economic prosperity and stability that those boomers created to workforces, and do so in a means that is in no means punitive. It's not based on tax policy. It's based purely on business fundamentals of transitioning a business through a sale from one party to another. It provides business owners with a very tangible means of supplementing their retirement. It helps to stabilize communities from an economic standpoint and an employment standpoint. And pointedly, it helps to provide workers who ordinarily wouldn't have an opportunity to be able to purchase a business a share in business ownership, and with that economic resiliency that they wouldn't otherwise achieve. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to see this opportunity, this snapshot in time, and take advantage of it with the tools that we have. And I see employee ownership, and we at Project Equity see employee ownership as one of the most valuable tools in the toolbox for being able to address this current circumstance. So with that, I'll kick it back over to Alison.
Wonderful. So I would just encourage anyone on the webinar today to not be shy. Please reach out. Let us know how we can be of service. Diane and John talked about how they offer, initial consults to business owners. Project Equity does the same. And I'll just speak for Project Equity. We're happy to speak with any of you, whatever your role may be. Whether you're at an SBDC or in a local government or a local chamber or a business owner. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We would love to talk to you. As you can tell, we're very passionate about this. And we believe that this is sorely needed right now.
Terrific. I want to thank all of our panelists and Project Equity for hosting. As we said at the top, we're really looking to build a robust ecosystem. And as you can see, we've already got a significant number of invaluable assets across the state and beyond. And so I want to just encourage again that folks reach out if you want to know some of the organizational work that's happening to try to coordinate a lot more activity across the state of Washington. Please feel free to reach out to our team at the Community Foundation and also to the team at Project Equity. And we'll have that webinar posted on Project Equity's website very soon. So please stay in touch, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Maury. This is great.